Hello. So we spoke about Durkheim's sociological method in our previous class and the way he defines the idea of the social fact. Well, many of these ideas were something that he was working on as he was developing his doctoral thesis. His doctoral thesis finally gets published actually prior to his book on the sociological method and is called Division of Labor in Society. That's the work we are going to be talking about today. And in this, you will see that while in the sociological method he defines social fact as social fact, he calls it social fact, here he is also sometimes referring to it as moral fact. And the concern remains that what is it that amidst such division of labor that is emerging in society, where people are doing different things than they were used to, and getting into different areas which may or may not overlap, what in this situation would hold society together, what would be the social glue. So just also a reminder, we spoke about Adam Smith and his thesis that it is the division of labor that actually makes societies more productive and contributes to what he calls the wealth of nations. Marx, we spoke about last week, actually challenges some of that view, and in one way Marx might also think of division of labor as something that is leading to alienation. Let's see what Durkheim has to say about division of labor. So his book, The Division of Labor in Society, comes out in 1893. It's his doctoral thesis that gets published as a book, and he writes in the preface to the book, "We do not wish to deduce morality from science, but to constitute a science of morality." Remember, I just said that he here is not looking at morality as something that is drawn from religious scriptures or has much to do with ethical concerns, but as something that shifts historically and geographically, as something that there can be a society where actions are considered right or moral or acceptable. They are the norm at a particular point in history, whereas that might be changing at another moment in history or elsewhere. So that's how he wants us to understand the notion of morality here, which in some ways you could translate as the social norm or also then social facts by extension. So it is a study of these social norms and facts that he's urging us to do and to develop a methodology for studying the same. In this particular sentence, he is basically critiquing several scholars of the time who are attempting to do a study of sociology, but drawing from positivistic notions and drawing from the physical sciences. They are adopting methods that are not quite suited to the study of society, but are very much drawn from the physical sciences. So he says that we don't want to just pretty much, even if our subject is changing, bring those methods to study it. What we need to develop is a science of morality. So that's his project. That's his project in life, is to, one, understand what is the glue that holds society together, but also to develop a science which is uniquely suited to the study of society and social norms and social relations, which we call sociology. So for the purpose of division of labor, let's look at what his central question is, which is also the guiding question for several other studies that he does throughout his life. So Durkheim is asking us, how does it come about that the individual, whilst becoming more autonomous, depends even more closely on society? So drawing from and observing the changes that he is seeing all around him in the great transformation, in the period from a rural to an industrial society, he is seeing autonomy of the individual increase, he is seeing an increasing division of labor, and in that process he is still observing that the society holds together. It doesn't just fall apart because structures have changed. So his question is, how come and what makes the society, which is now so different from each other, still remain together. Now, he also coins the term cult of the individual, and in an urban society where there is so much difference, people are doing different things, there are large populations that are either migrants or immigrants, and there is more focus on the individual than on the social. He says that one sees more personal autonomy and the cult of the individual emerging. And yet, you see social solidarity in this modern world. So, this interrelationship, one could say the dialectic between social solidarity and personal autonomy, is what he wants to understand. And in The Division of Labor in Society, he writes, and I quote, "All the society is nothing without individuals. Each one of them is more a product of society than its author." Now, this is very much a constructivist, a social constructivist argument, where he is arguing and he is showing us how, despite the fact that we might believe that we are autonomous and we are individuals and these are my ideas and my thoughts and my beliefs, how each one of that is constructed because of the societies we inhabit, because of the behaviors we see around us, and because of the norms that we take as for granted, that we have been conditioned into. So here he is very much going in that direction. In understanding this difference, he divides society into the past and the contemporary society that he is witnessing, and he talks about what he calls traditional society and modern society, and then differentiates the two. So traditional society is what one would see as more homogeneous. Let's say life in a small village, where pretty much everybody is doing everything. The potter might be making his pots, but also farming, and the family would contribute together towards farming and cooking and rearing of children, as would others work with each other and do basically the same thing. So society is more homogeneous. They go to the same church, they have the same festivals, they celebrate the same rituals, they have similar belief systems, they understand the same actions as right or wrong, and so there is these norms and these beliefs basically keep them together. There is a strong cohesion, and this similarity basically unites them. There is a strong social solidarity in traditional society, and Durkheim calls this mechanical solidarity. It's just in the act that this solidarity exists, kind of like a machine where the thing is working to produce something, and pretty much everybody is doing what needs to be done, not necessarily thinking too much about it. That's the way it is to be done, and that is the way it is being done. Now, in modern society, he sees it as a very heterogeneous society. There might be an electrician, there would be a potter, there would be a factory worker, there might be a retail store person, there would be immense amount of division of labor. There are also people coming in so many different parts of the country and also different parts of the world. This is the time where colonialism is at its peak. France is colonizing Algeria, and so there are immigrants coming in, there are French people going out and seeing other ways of life, and so difference in some ways also constitutes this heterogeneous society. So what in that situation keeps people together? And here Durkheim argues that the interdependency, I need a pot, I will go to you to buy a pot, and in place you need a cloth stitched, your dress made, and so you would go to the tailor. So it is these interlinkages, we are connected to each other through our interdependence, and this is what he defines as organic solidarity. I'll take a slight diversion to introduce how he wants to study these different societies methodologically, and what kind of methodological innovation comes through his study. So let's read from the same book. "We must make it incumbent upon us to allow no explanation that does not rely upon genuine proofs, to submit an order of facts to the scrutiny of science. It is not enough to observe, describe and classify them. That he has done, but now he wants to go deeper. But, and this is much more difficult, we must also, in Descartes' phrase, discover the perspective from which they become scientific, and that is, find in them some objective element which is capable of precise determination and, if possible, measurement. Now, if he wants to study social solidarity, how does one go about studying solidarity? One can maybe go and see how many times one goes to the church, but then solidarity might exist in different ways. So, it's a amorphous kind of thing, not so easy to define and not so easy to study. You can't really easily measure it. So, he's trying to find something that is more objective and therefore can be put to a tighter, more rigorous scrutiny, right. So, how does he do it? He says, it will be seen how we have studied social solidarity through the system of juridical rules. So, how for social solidarity he takes collective consciousness as the corollary, and in order to study the collective consciousness, he takes what can be maybe the best example of it or the best result of it is law, because law is a collective understanding. We all agree to abide by the law, So, he says, let's study law in order to understand social solidarity. Then he wants to define collective consciousness and he wants to define solidarity. So, we will read out from his text. He says, the totality of beliefs and sentiments common to average citizens of the same society forms a determinate system which has its own life. One could argue that he is being very deterministic here, but we also want to focus on how he is trying to get at what he means by social solidarity and collective consciousness. So, the totality of beliefs and sentiments common to the average citizens actually determines, according to him, one's life. One may call it collective or common conscience. This is something totally different from the consciousness of individuals, though it is only realized in individuals. Here he makes an important point. How else would you study collective consciousness without actually looking at individuals? If there is a doctrine from the church or from the state, I would still need to see how many individuals follow it, subscribe to it, believe it. So, I will need to also look at individuals. So, while it is a collective conscience, while it is something that is at a more common scale, its manifestation or its realization is at an individual scale. So, you need to study both. Then he wants to define solidarity. He does so by asking this question: how connected are members of the society to each other or to the collective consciousness or to the collective conscience? How much do you connect to the common ideas of your time? And what can be more evident or easy to study than the notion of law as a common idea, as a collective agreement, as something that we all understand and agree to follow. So, he says there is a shift in the nature of law as we have moved from traditional society to modern society, and which means that there is a shift in how law is looked at in mechanical solidarity and in organic solidarity. So, as we move from a more homogeneous to a heterogeneous society, the nature of law changes from punitive to contractual. What does he mean by that? He looks at traditional society and he observes that the kinds of law that existed in or that exist in traditional societies are mainly meant to keep the sameness or the homogeneity intact. So, if you deviate from the norm, if you do something that is not acceptable by society, then one is punished. And punishment here can be quite excessive because the society really wants to keep the homogeneity, keep the sameness. The society defines itself through that sameness, through that collective belief system. And so the law also is focused on punishing deviant behavior. Law is focused on punitive action, in contrast to when we see modern society. Here the solidarity that we have is more relational. It is about the social relations that make us interdependent on each other in this heterogeneous society. And how does that interdependence work? It works through the social contract. I agree to give you a piece of bread and you agree to stitch a dress for me, right? So there are social contracts that bind organic solidarity or modern society together. In this kind of society, the modern society, the kind of law is restitutive, such that if I have a social contract, or I have a contract with another person, another member of that society, and I break that contract, well, the emphasis on law then is on remedial measures, is on creating the like restituting, creating back what the other person might have lost. So maybe I will have to pay a fine to that other person because I broke that contract. Perhaps I would also have to make some concessions in order for the social contract to be renewed once again, or that individual, the contract between two different people to be renewed once again. And so this is the nature, largely the nature of law in a modern society. Now, he is not saying that punitive law has vanished from modern society, but the emphasis on law, he says the larger structure of law is based on the idea of restitutive law. And the Constitution, for example, is a very good example for that. We have all agreed to follow the Constitution. We have all agreed to how the Constitution frames our rights and duties. And when we go against the Constitution, then it is considered that we have committed a crime, and therefore accorded either a punitive action, but in relation to the kind of crime that we have committed, or made to somehow remedy the wrong that we have committed. So it restores the social contract. That's the nature of law in a modern society. Then he goes on to look at division of labor, and he says division of labor is something that is required in society, because the division of labor is what builds the social relations, right? It is what creates social relations, as long as there is a right amount of balance between social integration and social regulation, between the individual and society, right? And this kind of division of labor creates social solidarity, but that is not always the case. There are times when this division of labor becomes over-regulated, such as what he was observing in terms of the factory system, where there was excessive control, there was excessive regulation, and really the division of labor was being highly enforced. And this kind of over-regulation in the division of labor, he argues, leads to crisis and conflict. So class conflict, for example, can emerge out of a highly regulated division of labor. It can also be excessive, similar process, where it leads to disintegration, where the division of labor is so much that we are all inhabiting our own silos. There is very little relationship, social relationship involved in the way the division of labor in that society is functioning. There is so much more autonomy, but very little social contract or social relation, and everybody is working in their own small pockets. Such a division of labor would in fact not have much of a social glue and would allow the society to disintegrate. The third type of pathology, and he calls all of these deviations from the norm pathologies. Here I want to also remind you that Durkheim, also looking at other sciences and scholars of his time, is drawing a lot from the physical sciences, in this case biology, where things are working fine in a human body, it is great, there is a balance that is maintained, but when things go outside the norm, when things don't work as they're supposed to work, when things become excessive, then pathologies emerge. So he often uses the word pathology, drawing from biology. Also, his sense of organic solidarity, in fact, takes from a Darwinian notion of looking at an organism where each part is doing its own thing. For example, the liver does its own thing, the heart beats, the brain does its own thing, the hands are doing their work, but each one is tied to the other. They are related to the other and are central to making the whole organism work together as one. Similarly, in organic solidarity in modern society, each one is doing their own thing and are bound together because they are related to each other and they are all required to make society function. But sometimes things don't function as they are supposed to, and that's when pathologies emerge. The third kind of pathology he names as anomie. Anomie is the state of normlessness, when what was considered normal, what was considered the right way to do things, where there was a direction in which I was to move, or where the sense of right or wrong was quite clearly demarcated, all of that changes, and there are sudden changes in society such that there is a lack of regulation. No one knows what is right or what is wrong. There can be excessiveness, there can be total failures of things, and this kind of period he refers to as anomie. And the same thing can happen in the context of division of labor. So these are the three pathologies where division of labor can go berserk and not be good for the solidarity or the social glue of society. But in a normal situation where things are working in a balanced form, where there is integration and regulation working hand in hand or in sync with each other, nothing is excessive or over regulated or over disintegrated, then you have social solidarity. So I will end this lecture here, and we'll see you in my next class on Durkheim on suicide, where he takes some of these ideas further. Thank you.